Truth be told, in the early 1930s, the Italian force was one of the most powerful in the world and one of the most modern because it was the first to start rearming. The Fiat CR.32 was a biplane, like those World War I planes with two sets of wings. It even had a more sophisticated name, the sesquiplane. A sesquiplane is a plane with 1.5 wings, since its lower wing is shorter than the upper one, right? This plane was designed by the renowned Celestino Rosatelli, an Italian designer known for his unique aircraft in the 1930s and early 1940s, right? And that's why the Fiat CR.32 has this CR, which are the initials of Celestino Rosatelli. He created it in 1932, the CR.30. It was a biplane with a Fiat A30 RA aircraft engine, a 12-cylinder 5 engine, with two sections of 6 cylinders forming a 5. So this plane was refined shortly after, becoming the CR.32. And what did Rosatelli do? He took the same engine, but he made the fuselage slimmer and smaller, so he managed to get more power out of that same engine he was already using. It was on April 28, 1933, that the first example of the Fiat CR.32 flew from the Fiat airfield in Turin. Prototype number 1 quickly became a successful aircraft. Orders from the Regia Aeronautica and overseas quickly accumulated. There were 4 CR.32 versions: the Standard, Bis, Ter, and Quater. These versions differed in some specific features, especially the Bis version, which was the longest of them. The Bis version, which was the most numerous of them, as I mentioned, it used a slightly improved A30 Bis engine. It also had its standard armament of 2 Breda Società Anonima Fabbrica Army Torino 12.7 machine guns, which fired from above the engine, synchronized with the propeller blades. It had 2 smaller caliber machine guns, 7.7 on the lower wings. It also had pods installed on the lower wings themselves for mounting bombs. But incredibly, the pilots didn't like the second set of machine guns on the lower wings, and these machine guns were quickly removed in the TER version. The TER version improved the aircraft's instrumentation and gun sight. The Quater version included a standard radio, as earlier planes lacked one. We have to stop and realize the following. In the 1930s and the early 1930s, communication between aircraft, the standard was still to wiggle the wings at each other, or maybe a little flag, since the radio was still being implemented. That's why the Fiat CR.32 didn't have a radio as standard in the first series, only in the last one. And by World War II, having a standard radio became the norm, right? All the planes communicated by radio. It was a very light little plane, a very agile little plane, and it reached a maximum speed of 360 kilometers per hour. The total production of the Fiat CR.32 reached 1,300 units, and out of those 1,300 units, about 100 were manufactured under license in Spain, over in Madrid, by Construcciones Aeronáuticas Sociedad Anónima. As I said earlier, the main feature of the Fiat CR.32 is its agility and maneuverability. Because, since it's practically made of canvas in the back and some sheets of hard aluminum covering the steel and aluminum tubular structure, right, which it was made of, it was, in a way, a fragile airplane, but it made up for this structural fragility with its high maneuverability. This gave the pilots a certain advantage when compared to more resistant planes but less maneuverable ones. The landing gear of the CR.32 was large, the 2 main wheels were quite big, and they were covered by even larger aerodynamic fairings. You can see the features in the photos, right? They give it that toy airplane look, but those fairings, they help improve airflow around the fixed landing gear. There was a tail wheel back there, which is the 3rd wheel that lets it maneuver on the airfield, right? The CR.32's wings had an aluminum tube frame covered in fabric. And there were ailerons, which are the structures that make the plane maneuver, only on the upper wings. It had W-shaped structures, W-shaped metal structures, that connected the upper wing to the lower wing. And the cockpit for a single pilot had a height-adjustable seat and space for a parachute. It also came with a fire extinguisher, a compartment for weapons, and an oxygen system to help the pilot breathe at high altitude. An optical sight and terrain reconnaissance camera were optional. allowing the CR-32 to have versions for photographic reconnaissance. The fuel tank of the CR-32 was located between the engine and the pilot's cockpit and had a capacity of 325 liters. However, if the pilot needed emergency help to reach the airfield, he had an auxiliary fuel tank right above the pilot's head, up on the upper wing, which could hold 25 liters of fuel. He only used the emergency to just get by. The Regia Aeronautica placed the first CR-32 orders in March 1934. The guy ended up equipping the first, third, and fourth Stormocaccia, which were the fighter wings of the Italian Air Force. These were also the most traditional fighter wings within the Italian Air Force. So, it's a reflection of the importance of the type for the country. Although many people said that this little plane was a fragile thing, the ground crew really liked the plane because it was easy to maintain, and the people who flew these aircraft loved it. Because in fact, even in the Italian Air Force itself, there was a high value placed on the pilot's aerobatic skills. So it was a plane that allowed the pilot to do a lot of aerobatics. The Italian pilots loved it then. As for the aerobatic show teams, don't even get me started. Every time a head of state landed there in Italy went to Rome, they were greeted by a formation of CR-32 planes, flying over the city doing stunts. Anyway, just to impress the guest. In the same way, starting in 1936, Mussolini sent these aerobatic teams to fly over the biggest European cities, all the capitals, putting on a great show to promote Italy and the fascist government to everyone, right? In 1937 and 1938, they held this same show in South America. The expeditions arrived by ship, planes were assembled here, and they traveled through South American countries in 1937 and 1938 for 2 years. Interestingly, these trips ended up resulting in the sale of the CR-32 to Paraguay and Venezuela. The CR-32's maneuverability was excellent. Its turning radius was so small that this put the aircraft, at the time, among the best in the world. It really managed to be an excellent fighter aircraft and also an interceptor. But this aspect made the engineers and the Italian military realize that the biplane design still had something to offer, as if it wasn't doomed. All the other countries condemned the biplane design, while the Italians thought it would still be useful. But it was there, in July of 1936, that the golden era of the Fiat CR.32 began. That's when the Spanish Civil War began in Spain. And just a few days after the Spanish Civil War started, it was declared, General Franco, who had most of his troops over in Morocco, asked Mussolini for help first, then Hitler, for an air component from those two countries to help transfer those troops from Morocco to Spain. Both dictators accepted Franco's request for help and ended up sending their respective expeditionary air forces. The aviation, the aviazione legionaria. I love this term. The Italian aviazione legionaria. It was made up of fighter, bomber, and transport squadrons, as well as reconnaissance aircraft. The Germans sent the Condor Legion, which we'll cover in another more important video. That's not today's topic. Check it out later. What matters now is that on August 14, 1936, the first 12 CR-32s landed at Melilla Port in Spain. So shortly after that, the 3 fighter squadrons that the Italians flew in Spain from 36 to 39 were formed: Asso di Bastoni, La Cucaracha, and Gamba di Ferro. Quickly, after the 14th, already on the 21st, Lieutenant Vittorino Ceccarelli opened the score for the Fiat CR.32 shooting down a Republican Nieuport, one of Franco's enemies, over Cordoba. It was the first aircraft ever shot down by a CR.32. By the end of the war, 376 CR.32s had been sent to Spain, and 6 of those were captured. One of the 6 captured was sent to the Soviet Union, where Russians evaluated it to assess the aircraft's capabilities. Interestingly, the Russians weren't very impressed with the aircraft. However, the Fiat CR.32 quickly established itself as an air superiority fighter in Spain. First, because the Republicans were using a mix of old little planes with very little capability and absolutely no standardization. So that made it much easier for Franco's nationalists, together with the Italians, to take air superiority over the country. They had new, unique types and just needed maintenance and availability. But such was the surprise with the good performance of the CR.32 that they shot down 60, and 48 of those 60 are confirmed Tupolev SBs. For those who don't know, the Tupolev Skorostnoy Bombardirovshik was a high-performance Soviet aircraft in the 30s, considered unbeatable because of its speed as a bomber. So, 93 of these planes were sent by Stalin to support the Republicans. And look, out of 93, 48 were shot down by Fiat CR.32s. Impressive. Well, shortly after, the Russians sent the Polikarpovs to support the Republicans in Spain, those beautiful little planes. I love the Polikarpov. I'm a sucker for Polikarpov. They sent the Polikarpov I-15, which was a plane, interestingly, with retractable landing gear. I also love that design. The Polikarpov E-16, known as the Little Drum, was a small monoplane with a short wingspan that made it look like a drum. But the Fiat CR.32 also did very well against those two planes. It's impressive how even the first version of the Messerschmitt Bayerische Flugzeugwerke 109, which went to Spain, was on the same level as the CR.32 during combat with the Soviet Polikarpovs. What do we learn from all this combat? From all this combat with planes being shot down in victories? Of course, a list of aces would eventually emerge, including Spanish aces with the first of these Spanish aces. The greatest of them was Major Joaquim Garcia Morata y Castaño, who had 40 victories, 36 of which were with the CR.32. Right after him came Captain Manuel Vázquez Sagastizabal, who had 21 victories, all of them with the CR.32. In third place was Commander Angel Salas Larrazabal, with 13 victories in the CR.32 and a total of 16. And look how cool that is. Angel Salas Larrazabal ended up becoming the commander of the Blue Squadron, which supported the Germans in the invasion of the Soviet Union in '41. We'll discuss that later, so stay tuned. In May 1939, right at the end of the Spanish Civil War, a little before the Second World War started, 2/3 of the Regia Aeronautica's fighters were still Fiat CR.32s. They had 288 Fiat CR.32s in Libya and Italy, and in Italian East Africa, that is, there in Ethiopia and Eritrea, they had more than 24. When Italy finally entered World War II on June 10, 1940, the entire fighter force in North Africa, which is the northern part of Africa, it was made up impressively of 36 Fiat CR.32s and 51 Fiat CR.42s. The Fiat CR.32 saw its first World War II action the day after the declaration of war, when 6 of these planes took off to face a formation of 6 Blenheim, English Blenheim, bombers that were going to attack the El Adra airfield. What happened in that battle? The Fiats downed 2 Blenheims and damaged the other 4, with no losses of their own. But shortly after that action, the Fiat CR.32s ended up becoming secondary aircraft, right? And started doing ground attacks, strafing runs. But given the low caliber and the little armament of the aircraft, these attacks weren't very successful, no. The Fiat CR.32's biggest World War II success occurred in Italian East Africa. There, in Italian East Africa, 2 fighter squadrons used the CR.32, the 410th and the 411th Squadron. The plane's baptism of fire in East Africa occurred on June 17, 1940. On that day, 2 lieutenants named Aldo Maioli and Flaminio Bossi shot down Junkers 86 and Hurricanes from the South African Air Force. Later that year, on October 28, when Italy invaded Greece, the Fiat CR.32 aircraft from the 6th Stormo also took part in frontline operations, but a few days later they were pulled back for secondary duties. The following year, after the invasion of Crete in May 1941, the Italian Fiat CR.32 saw their last action together with the 163rd Squadron, supporting the invasion, launching from roads in the Mediterranean under Italian control. After that, the Fiat CR.32 were really relegated to training and secondary roles, and ended up being used in those functions until the end of World War II. But for exports, the CR.32's life wasn't over. Take a look. Still in 1933, during the CR.32's first year, Chiang Kai-shek, the Generalissimo of China, purchased 24 units for the country. Interestingly, these units used Vickers, not Breda Società Anonima Fabbrica Armi Torino machine guns. All these units were stationed at the Nangarang airfield, which is near Shanghai. And they were even used quite successfully in the first battles they had against the Japanese Air Force. However, supplying and maintaining these aircraft faced many difficulties. The pilots preferred these aircraft, saying they were better than the American Curtiss Hawk and Boeing B shooter, which they also had. By August 1937, all the Chinese Fiat CR.32s had become junk. In 1936, as part of this publicity campaign that Mussolini carried out across all of Europe, flying these planes in aerobatic displays, Austria purchased 45 CR.32s for Jagdgeschwader II in Wiener Neustadt. Soon after the Anschluss, the 1938 unification with Germany, all these Fiat CR.32s were quickly given to the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe didn't keep them long and soon passed them all to its ally, Hungary. Hungary, which in 1935 had bought 70 Fiat CR.32s, making this the greatest export success of the Fiat CR.32. These Hungarian Fiat CR.32s first saw combat in March 1939 during the brief Hungarian-Slovak War, which you probably haven't heard of, but you'll learn about here on the channel. In April 1941, these Fiat CR.32s took part in the invasion of Yugoslavia, with Hungary supporting the Germans. And shortly after, when Hungary also supported the Germans in the invasion of the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa, the Fiat CR.32s started to defend Hungarian territory. In this role, they shot down 3 Tupolev SBs attacking Hungarian territory on June 29th. Shortly after that, the Hungarian Fiat CR.32s were also relegated to training and ended up being replaced by more modern aircraft. And finally, guys, like I said, those missions, those acrobatic trips by the Italians here in the 30s, right? 37 and 38 resulted in sales of the CR.32s here in the region. First to Venezuela, which bought 10 units in 1938. These 10 units had a much larger radiator, which was to cool the engine in the tropical heat of Venezuela, right? But in 1943, these Venezuelan aircraft were all scrapped due to a lack of parts and supplies to keep them operational, right? Because of the war. And Paraguay, also in 1938, bought 5 units of the Fiat CR.32, and they ended up serving the country's Air Force for many, many years until they were retired. Only 2 Fiat CR.32s remain, one in Madrid's Spanish Air Force Museum and one in the Italian Air Force Museum in Vigna del Valle near Rome. I saw that one myself. This photo here is proof. I took it myself. An interesting fact is that the Fiat CR.32 that's in Madrid has the tail from the same plane in which Garcia Morato died, who was the top Spanish ace with 40 victories. He died a month after the Civil War ended. Tragically, he was performing a stunt for some reporters for the press when his plane crashed and he ended up dying. Well, if you like this video, I hope you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and click the bell to get notifications as soon as I post more videos. If you have any questions, you can write them in the comments section. I'll do my best to read and answer all the questions. And I'll wrap up here by thanking you for watching and see you next time here on Sala de Guerra.